My hands reacted without my brain even comprehending what we were doing, raising the gun high and pointing it at her chest. I saw the knife coming down as if in slow motion, then thick drops of blood splashing in the air as the bullet ripped through her stomach and heart. She jerked backwards, the knife rising back up as her arm spasmed. Stumbling, she stepped forward, futilely slashing at the air 6 inches in front of Richie's neck with all her strength before falling face first onto the porch. Richie hadn't even reacted as the knife whizzed in the air towards his body. He stood, shell-shocked and dazed, like a victim from a war zone. So did I, except with a smoking gun in my hand. Screaming began to emanate all up and down the street as people started running out of their houses. For a couple of seconds, I thought everyone had simply reacted to the sounds of gunfire. Perhaps some of them had even seen me kill Melissa, though if they had, they would have known my actions were clearly taken in self-defense. She was clutching a knife tightly in her right hand, her eyes bulging from their sockets, the maniac grin eternally etched across her thin, pretty face in a grisly death mask. I quickly realized the other people on the street were not coming out to investigate the gunshots, but instead running for their lives. I also saw men, women, even children, chased by family members wielding knives, axes, and guns. Across the street from Richie's house, I saw a little girl, no older than 10, running in her bright yellow SpongeBob pajamas. The mother, an overweight woman with pendulous breasts and greasy black hair, held a blood-stained samurai sword above her head, breathing heavily as she sprinted after her daughter with murder in her eyes. Under the harsh glare of the streetlights, she looked surreal, like a villain from a cartoon. "Mommy, no!" the girl shrieked, flailing her arms in front of her as she ran, as if hoping an invisible guardian angel would grab her up and carry her away. "Daddy, help me!" But I had a feeling her dad wasn't coming, based on the amount of blood already on the murder weapon. Richie and I began to run towards the girl, but the mother closed the distance quickly, her nightgown flying furiously around her waist. Her eyes wild, a twisted grin marring her pale face, she raised the sword and brought it down into the back of one of the girl's legs. With a squeal of agony, the girl fell forward, her pajamas quickly turning crimson with the blood streaming down her leg. She began to crawl away, weeping and shrieking for her father. Behind her, the mother raised the sword again, intending to strike a killing blow. With the girl on the ground, I had a clear shot now. I'd been tempted to try to take it earlier, but the girl had stood right between her mother and I feared that I would kill them both if I fired. Now I had the mother right in my sights, the lunatic gleam in her dark eyes making her seem somehow inhuman, even alien. I squeezed the trigger, watching her head explode in a shower of hair and skin and bone splinters, as a short burst of 3 or 4 bullets exploded at the end of the barrel. Her headless body stood there for a few minutes, holding the bloody sword high, the neurons still firing in a body that hadn't realized it had lost its life yet. She staggered forward, falling towards her daughter, the spurting stump of her neck soaking the girl in the mother's blood. The girl continued to crawl away from this nightmarish figure that had once been her mom. Running forward, Richie grabbed the girl, carefully lifting her up behind her knee and shoulders. I covered them as the mayhem broke out up and down the street, continuously moving the barrel of the automatic rifle in the direction of the nearby sounds, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Most of the creatures were sparse, a few hundred feet away, but the thick forest was stretched out behind them for miles. Further down the street, I saw chaos and bloodshed as deranged family members murdered their sons and daughters, their mothers and fathers, littering the streets with corpses. Pain-filled screams shattered the silence of the night, echoing and distorting as they mixed into a nightmarish cacophony. Even months later, I still hear them while I'm falling asleep, the horror-filled cries of children in their last moments. We ignored the bloodshed and ran back towards the house. The girl's blood dripped all over Richie's arm. She moaned and kept rolling her head, eventually letting it settle against his chest. Then she went quiet, her eyes closing, a peaceful look coming over her face. We ran through the open house. Richie took the girl into the kitchen, petting her on the table. I stayed behind, locking the door before I also engaged the deadbolt. I turned around, assessing the damage. The girl's eyes started to close as Richie took off her pajama bottoms. We both had college degrees and a great deal of theoretical knowledge on many subjects, but neither of us had any real experience with assessing or dressing wounds. I took out my phone, instinctively going to YouTube to type, "How do I give someone stitches?" But I noticed my internet didn't work. My phone calls and text messages refused to go through. Apparently, they had taken down all the cell towers, as well as revoking emergency services. Okay, we have no internet, so we're gonna have to do this blind. I don't think it's that difficult. I think you know more about this than I do, Richie said. You always loved anatomy and dissection and all that. I nodded grimly. I went and washed my hands while Richie grabbed a box of latex gloves from the kitchen drawer. I walked back to the girl and started to clean the area with paper towels, a bowl of water, and a clean rag sitting next to the prone figure on the table. Soon, the water had turned a bright red as I used the rag to clean the blood off her skin. I could see the wound had not hit any vital areas. I saw no severed blood vessels spurting bright red arterial blood in time with her heartbeat, and the bleeding had already slowed. I sighed in relief at our small bit of luck. It looks like it's a lot worse than it is. The sword cut into the muscle somewhat, but it missed all the major arteries and veins in the area. She might have a hard time walking, but I think that as long as we clean and bandage it properly, she should be fine. Assuming she gets out of here alive, Richie pointed out. I nodded. We went and grabbed a sewing kit from the living room, something Melissa had left behind. From the garage, she got a length of fishing line. After sterilizing the needle and the line and cleaning the wound with alcohol, I threaded it and began to stitch the girl back together. The girl still lay on the table, catatonic and pale, as Richie and I sat in the living room, unsure of what to do next, waiting for her to wake up from that cathartic state. "You know what I think," Richie said. "No, but I'm sure you're going to tell me," I said, glancing out the window. Richie's eyes gleamed, his hands shaking. I couldn't tell if it was terror or excitement. You know how the Bible sounds totally nuts, at least the Old Testament does, where they talk about how all the women came from man's ribs and how there were only two people and everyone is descendant from their children's incestuous couplings? I nodded. This was a topic Richie had gone on at length before. I knew where he was going to try to steer the conversation, and I sighed, looking out the window again. Other than the dozens of bloody bodies strewn across the street, everything looked idyllic, just another peaceful night in a small American town. "Yeah, and you think it has something to do with aliens, right?" I said. He nodded quickly, gesticulating crazily with his hands now. "I mean, yeah, I think about it. A woman coming from a man's rib? That doesn't even make sense. Unless it was some sort of genetic engineering. Perhaps they wanted his bone marrow for its DNA. "You don't need to take out someone's rib to get their DNA," I retorted. "You can literally get DNA from any part of their body, except the red blood cells, of course." He looked at me quizzically. "I forgot just how much you know off the top of your head sometimes. Why not the red blood cells?" "Because they lose the nucleus when the progenitor cell creates them, so they have no DNA and no nucleus." Thought I saw a shadow flicker across the street, but when I turned my head, I saw just shadows. A flag waved lazily in the front yard. "Well, anyway, they might have had a reason for using the bone marrow for genetic engineering. Why do you think Adam and Eve's great-grandchildren weren't deformed mutants or babbling idiots?" Richie asked. "I don't know. You tell me. I'm assuming it's because the story's a load of bullshit." He smiled at this. "Because the kids were genetically engineered too, probably the grandkids, and so on. The aliens likely kept changing each individual's genetic code, so these few people could reproduce with their own siblings without harmful effects. They probably engineered all the different races too. They made the two genders, so why not?" Richie explained enthusiastically. I had to give him credit. The whole idea made sense in a weird kind of way. "And another weird thing," Richie said, "is that you could make a woman from a man, but not a man from a woman. To make a woman, you need a man's DNA. All you need is to remove the Y chromosome and duplicate the X chromosome, right? But you can't make a man from a woman's DNA because the Y chromosome would be entirely missing. The Y chromosome would be so synthetically engineered from the nucleotides, which would pose a huge problem, much harder than just replicating the X chromosome. There's no way that people who wrote the Bible could have known that. I think what's going on now is just demonic, I replied. Aliens wouldn't come all this way here just to take a random monkey and engineer it into a human species. And they wouldn't care about replacing people. What kind of sense would that make? But in hindsight, even though both of us were wrong, I think Richie was much closer to the truth. The girl woke up about 15 minutes later. I heard her moaning from the living room. Turning away from the window, where I'd kept a constant watch, I saw her rising on the table, her small face a mask of pain and confusion. "Where am I?" "You're just across the street from your house. We brought you inside," I told her. "Where's my dad?" I just shook my head. I haven't seen any living people on the street in over 20 minutes. If your dad's alive, then he must have left. There are probably people hiding in the woods until things cool down, I replied. In truth, I thought there was no chance that her father was still alive. I walked over to the girl and put a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, her dark hair falling over her face as she pulled away. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Julius, and my friend's name is Richie. You already know Richie, though, right?" "I've seen him a few times, mowing the lawn and stuff, but I don't really know him." "Well, he's one of the good guys, and so am I. That's why we brought you inside and bandaged your leg. I even gave you stitches, though I don't know how professional they look. They'll do the job until we can get you to a hospital, though, I think." "My name's Alice," she said, smiling, red spots rising on her cheeks. "Thanks, I guess, but do you know..." At that moment, the lights flickered, then came back to life for a moment, and then died again. "Damn," I said. Richie sprang up from the couch, navigating his way through the dark to the kitchen. I heard him shuffling through the drawers, and then he pulled out 2 flashlights. He turned them on, and then began to walk over to give me the other one. "No need," I said, turning the attached light on my rifle on. Its LED looked close to blinding, much brighter than Richie's 2 flashlights. He turned and gave the other one to Alice. "Thanks," she said shyly, turning it on. I went back to the window, deciding to check and see if there was any movement yet. With the street lights out, I could barely see anything. I shone my light through the window and screamed when I saw a face standing inches from the other side of the window, grinning. Strange white tentacles covered the area where its eyes should have been, writhing and undulating, thick with slime and blood. Underneath it, I could see the face splitting in two as its grin spread even wider, separating except for 5 inches of bone and glistening muscle at the back. Hundreds of sharp serrated teeth gleamed in the light. Its body looked skinned and wet with blood that dripped from its bony fingers. It closed its mouth, the flesh coming together without any lines or marks indicating where it separated, and it gurgled as it spoke. "The experiment is nearly complete. We'll keep the strong alive. In the end, you'll stand alone, and to us, you will return. Don't be afraid. We'll make the strong eternal." "Why are you doing this?" I screamed, my fingers tightening on the trigger. I wanted to blow apart this monstrosity, but something inside me told me to hold my fire. I had a feeling that he had not come alone, and if I started shooting, I might force them to invade the house and attack us. "You have 3 hours until the end of the experiment," it said, turning to leave. It ignored my question. I watched the muscles on its skinless body contracting as it walked away, the huge tentacles sprouting from its head, constantly writhing like snakes. I saw the alien creature walk over to the woods on the other side of the street, where 2 more of its kind stood waiting, both naked and skinned. A man in a black robe with the hood pulled up over his face followed behind them as they disappeared into the shadows. I hadn't realized just how massive they were until a human form stood directly beside one. They towered over him, at least 8 feet tall, with their tentacles stretched out far behind them. I turned to see Richie and Alice standing horror-struck in the kitchen. They were preparing some of the perishable food by flashlight, making ham sandwiches with cheese and lettuce, drinking milk and orange juice. I sat down, grabbing a sandwich and taking a bite. "Well, Richie," I said through a mouthful of sandwich, "I think you're right about the experiments on us. I don't know why or what they hope to accomplish, but something intelligent is clearly using us as guinea pigs. Did you hear what it said? What's going to happen in 3 hours? Is that when they plan to kill all of us, the survivors? They already wiped out most of the town," Alice said bitterly. "They killed my mom." "They killed my family too," I said, "and I think we'll all be dead soon if we don't do something. We can't stay here. We got to get out of town. We have to warn people what's happening here." "You said those government goons already know about it," Richie said. "Who else are we going to have to warn? No one would believe us, not for a second. I barely believe us." I felt like I had been slapped. I hadn't thought about the man in black SUVs ever since we took Alice in. Where had they gone? Why weren't they here, tracking down people associated with the anomaly and shooting them? Unless they'd abandoned the town. Perhaps it had gone too far for such measures to be of any use. Perhaps this was why they had disabled 911 by the time I got to Richie's house. A shiver of fear ran through my body as I contemplated it. "What about getting revenge from Melissa? And your wife," he pointed at me, "and your mother," he pointed at Alice. I laughed at that. "Revenge? With what? The 3 magazines I have left for this rifle? You guys don't even have weapons, and she's just a 10-year-old girl. I want revenge just as much as anyone, but we have to focus on survival. Most of all, we have to focus on her surviving," I said, nodding towards Alice. "We're the only people left who can help her get out of here alive." Richie was about to say something when shrieking started from outside. I heard a man yelling for his life. I ran to the window and saw someone banging on Alice's house across the street. "Oh God, please help me, someone!" When no one answered, he began running towards Richie's house. I figured he'd been doing this for a while, and when he saw the beam of my detachable light, his eyes widened. "Oh, thank God! Please let me in! They're right behind me!" I looked at the man in wonder for a long moment. Then recognition came to me. It was the agent I'd ambushed in the woods. I could tell by the broken nose, the bloody mark on his forehead, the black suit, even his cold eyes. Without thinking, I ran to the hallway and flung the front door open. "Come in. Stop yelling. You're going to attract everything within a 10-mile radius with that." Then I saw what was behind him, coming up the dark street, and my words caught in my throat. A dozen agents in black suits walked forward, bone-white tentacles whipping crazily around their heads. Their eyes were gone. The entire top of their heads had been replaced by those strange alien appendages. Below it, I saw their mouths gnashing constantly, biting the air with bloody serrated teeth. They were coming in our direction. "Time to go," I yelled into the house. They had been preparing backpacks of food and water, and in a flash, we were out of the house. Alice gripped Richie's hand tightly as her small face contorted with fear at the sight of the agents. I'd put in a fresh magazine after we got into the house. Aiming through the sights, I began to fire, my ears ringing as fire erupted from the barrel. Blood erupted from the chest and faces of the agents, the tentacles splitting apart and spewing black fluid on the pavement. Their high-pitched, animalistic shrieks echoed off the street as they ran forward in a blur. I remember seeing 2 of them fall, then 4, then another couple stumbled as the gun clicked beneath my fingers. I'd gone through all 30 rounds, and it wasn't enough. 3 of them still ran at us when a blinding light flashed above the trees. I heard a thwack, thwack, thwack sound as a powerful engine roared behind us. I looked up just in time to see a Black Hawk helicopter flying overhead. A man with a machine gun began firing, mowing down all the remaining agents in a matter of moments. He turned the gun towards those crawling on the ground, still alive, and with a flash of bullets, they stopped moving as well. Then he slowly began to turn the gun on us. I had started to reload, slamming the magazine in as fast as I could, Without thinking, I raised it, looking through the sights, and fired. As if in slow motion, I saw the man above me in the helicopter jerk before falling out of the side door. With a heavy thud, his body hit Richie's lawn. The helicopter kept flying and soon disappeared over the forest, the sound of its blades receding and then disappearing within seconds. I turned to Richie, seeing his sweaty, bloodshot eyes grow wide. The agent stood behind him, his face covered in blood. Richie still held Alice's hand, and the girl had her face pressed against his chest, silently crying. "We really need to get out of here," I said, looking hard at the agent. I wondered how much he knew and how much he would tell me. Our bedraggled group, bloody and sore, injured and all, began walking as one towards the trail down the street, one that I knew ran through a nature reserve and came out at the next town over. And as I listened to the agent talk, I realized just how wrong I had been about everything happening in my town. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Saikat, Lee Kendall, Janet, and Chris Kinsella for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. And of course, thanks to Xaronan, Winter, Tyler Parker, Stephanie Carrington, Sarah ASMR, Hi Stacy, Emily Coltsfoot, and Cinnamon Fox, and Bella Lee for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. As I said, if you'd like to have your name read out at the end of every episode that I make, and maybe get a little more, come on down to Patreon and sign up, or become a member on YouTube. Ghostly Reader tier contributors get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down and give it a look. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.